It is the eighth wonder of the world.
The canal is Panama. Panama is the canal.
An engineering marvel operating non-stop for close to a century.
It's that Panama is the only port in the world that has terminal in two oceans.
And it is about to get a lot bigger.
No project in the world is probably bigger than the canal right now.
That is a powerfully big addition to the Panama Canal, and it really is impressive.
A multi-billion-dollar effort that could change the way products are shipped throughout the world.
The expansion of the Panama Canal will revolutionize the trade routes.
A revolution that may have enormous economic implications for Houston, its port, and much of southeast Texas.
We're well on our way to being ready for this.
But as Houston prepares, so are other cities, hoping to capitalize on this new once-in-a-century opportunity.
Like many ports in the United States, the Port of Miami is gearing up.
And if Houston does benefit financially, what will all of it mean for the quality of life near an expanded, busier port, importing and exporting record numbers of container shipments from all over the world?
Plans have a huge impact on micro-communities.
It's going to impact us more than what we're currently being impacted now.
From Central America to the Texas Gulf Coast, the game has changed.
I think if we in the Houston region take advantage of it, it is a game changer.
Game changer.
It's nothing short of a game changer.
This is going to be a game changer for all of us, and it's a game changer. We are a game changer.
Hello again, I'm Tom Abrams, reporting from Panama, home to the legendary Panama Canal. Over the next half hour, we'll tell you how that canal is undergoing an incredible expansion, one that will more than double its ability to help world trade and commerce. We'll also tell you how what's happening here in Central America could have an economic impact worth billions of dollars to the southeast Texas coast and to the Port of Houston.
The Panama Canal is an engineering marvel, connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Between 30 and 50 ships every day travel between two sets of locks. It operates around the clock, as it has since first opening in August 1914, when the ship Ancon crossed its 50-mile stretch. After the French tried and failed to build it in the late 19th century, the United States led the construction of the canal under the guidance of then U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt in 1904. Despite dangerous working conditions and disease that killed thousands of workers and significant engineering adjustments along the way, the canal was completed in just 10 years, $23 million under budget. Since then, it has served as a major conduit for trade around the globe, and it has helped the small Central American country grow exponentially.
Panama is a country of 3.4 million people.
Despite the lack of a true middle class and a need for both better education and health care, Panama has become a hotspot for cheap real estate and friendly banking regulations.
Well, Panama is much more like a canal, and we're proving that now.
A look at the capital city's growing skyline in the midst of a global recession is visible testament to the canal's influence.
Panama is a very stable country. We have a very strong financial center. We have the largest free trade zone in the Americas, the second largest free zone in the world.
But today's ships are larger than those built even 30 years ago. Not all of them can fit through the canal's narrow locks. So by the time the United States handed over control of the canal to the Panamanians at the dawn of this century, the canal's managers knew they had to do something to broaden their market and remain relevant.
Here you bring advantage to everyone to be able to compete in a much more efficient way.
Alberto Alemán Zubieta is the CEO of the Panama Canal Authority.
So we have this issue about capacity and the size of ships that we can allow to go through the canal. So we start looking at, how can we add capacity to the Panama Canal? Because this is an infrastructure and it has a limited capacity. So we needed to look at what can we do, after we reach capacity.
What the authority chose to do was expand and accommodate much larger ships known as post-Panamax vessels.
Cargo ships are measured by what's called TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. One TEU is about the size of what an 18-wheeler could carry. Here at the Panama Canal, they can handle ships about the size of 5,000 TEUs, but when the expansion is complete in 3 years, that size will more than double.
The expansion began in earnest in 2007 after 70% of Panama's voters approved the $5 billion privately funded project, adding third lanes of traffic on both the Pacific and Atlantic sides of the canal. Those wider, deeper lanes are what will change the canal's influence in world trade.
Basically, this is a shortcut. But now it's a shortcut that you can actually come with a much bigger rig, and it has a huge impact on the world transportation, because by modifying those dimensions, you have economy of scale, okay, that will benefit everyone else and will add value to the service we provide. And it's not only about container cargo. You got petroleum products, you have chemicals, you have grains. All of that moves through the canal.
This vantage point gives a great perspective of the canal expansion. These are the current Miraflores locks on the Pacific side. Just beyond them, those hills you see, they'll be dug down, dredged out, and that'll be the new third lane that can accommodate much larger ships, which will eventually then travel back into the canal and meet up with the existing lanes just in front of that bridge on the horizon.
The big boon for the canal is the new traffic it can attract from the Far East. Now, much of the post-Panamax traffic heading toward the Americas ports in the west coast of the United States, a majority of it into the port of Long Beach, California, because it just can't fit through the canal right now. But with the new wider, deeper lanes, ships that would have stopped on the west coast will now be able to travel through the canal. And that, in turn, could mean big things for Houston and Southeast Texas.
If we take full advantage of it, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of trade flowing through Houston.
When we come back, we'll show you what Houston is doing to take advantage of the canal's expansion and how trade routes could shift to the city's advantage for decades to come.
But the calculus works very nicely for Houston when these vessels that are oversized can now come through the Panama Canal and come into the port of Houston.
Historically, we're seen as the city where rail meets the sea.
Jeff Mosley is a man on a mission.
This has a huge opportunity for Houston to grow high-paying jobs.
As the giant map on the wall of his downtown Houston office demonstrates, he believes Houston is in prime position to benefit from the expansion of the Panama Canal and become a new major hub for goods distribution.
Just looking at this map alone, you can see where the calculus starts to work very nicely for a Chicago-Houston corridor.
Houston will become a strategic port, a logistics hub.
As chair of the Greater Houston Partnership and cheerleader for all things Houston, Mosley left his map behind for the real thing, and in late June took a delegation of local business leaders to Panama to see the canal expansion firsthand.
To go from the Pacific side to the Atlantic and vice versa, going through this new set of locks in around 10 hours.
Surprisingly, there is a long shared history between Panama and Houston. In the same document that Teddy Roosevelt used to begin the canal effort was the authorization to create the Port of Houston. Both opened 10 years later in 1914. The Central American country and the biggest city in Texas have ties which go even deeper.
That relationship has expanded into other areas. There are 2 daily flights from Houston to Panama. The medical center serves as a host to a lot of the patients that come from Panama, and there are more university students at universities in Texas than any other state.
Juan Sosa is the former Panamanian ambassador to the U.S. and a transplanted Houstonian. He helped Mosley lead the group on its mission to Panama and is a consistent liaison between Panamanian and Houston dealmakers.
Houston is positioned in an area that has the potential of 100 million consumers.
The thought is that if Houston can take advantage of the canal's expansion and play host to greater numbers of cargo ships, major cities between the Rocky Mountains to the west and the Appalachian Mountains to the east would use Houston as their main hub for distribution. That would include cities like Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Chicago, cities that now get a lot of their Far East goods through Long Beach or even Seattle.
We know that the Panama Canal is going to forever change the way logistics and distribution come through the Gulf Coast.
The expansion of the Panama Canal is only about halfway complete. It'll probably be another 3 years before they're finished, sometime in 2014. But already, we're beginning to see the impacts the canal expansion could have on southeast Texas.
It's already begun here at a 15,000-acre industrial park in Baytown called Cedar Crossing. Adjacent to a public Chambers County barge dock and connected by 2 rail lines, the park is already home to massive distribution centers for Walmart and for the Home Depot.
We have the ability, I think, to balance our trade in our park.
Lee Goodwin is an executive vice president for Cedar Crossing and was part of the delegation in Panama. He thinks his park is on the forefront of tremendous growth.
We certainly have every reason to believe that with the advent of the bigger container ships coming into the Port of Houston, that the reach out into the adjacent states as far away as Chicago will greatly influence the growth of intermodal parks, of industrial parks in the Houston area as we go forward.
But before that growth can happen, and Houston can reap the potential economic windfall that Jeff Mosley predicts on his wall-sized map, the Port of Houston Authority has some expanding of its own to finish.
I think because of our geography and of our infrastructure and our growth plans in our infrastructure, that Houston will be one of the 2 big recipient ports in the United States.
Jim Edmonds is the chairman of the Port of Houston Authority, and during his most recent trip to Panama, the port and the Panama Canal Authority re-signed a memorandum of understanding between the two, a marketing agreement in which one assures the other of a mutually beneficial relationship. It is groundwork that's been laid for years already.
To anticipate this kind of growth and to see this kind of growth, we've had to plan for it and begin construction quite a few years ahead.
That includes continued expansion of Bayport, deepening and widening part of the ship channel, and dredging the channel at the points that it doesn't drop to 45 feet. Additional rail and highway access is needed eventually, too, to take full advantage of that opportunity.
We are a transportation hub.
Brad Walker is a statistical analyst and Houstonian who does work for the Panama Canal Authority.
So we're talking a lot of money, a lot of jobs, potentially.
Potentially, absolutely significant, very significant.
Are we still talking a lot of ifs?
There are quite a bit of things that need to be in place for that, both inside the fence and outside the fence in the ports in the eastern Gulf Coast. And I think Houston is being one of the closest ports to the canal, has a great potential if everything, you know, if the transportation corridor issues are in place and other issues.
But the port believes the ifs are really more a matter of when.
Bayport is being built out to accept the larger ships. Distribution centers are being built to distribute, for example, consumer goods to the local area as well as Middle America, so we're already well on our way. We already have excellent roads and trucking. Plenty of trucks. We already have rail that's in place at Barber's Cut. At some point in time down the road, as the market requires, there will be rail in place at Bayport. We're in a good place.
There's no doubt that Houston wants a piece of the pie when it comes to the Panama Canal expansion. But before the city earns its first dollar, it has to face a lot of competition.
And it's like a big game of chess. It's fascinating.
When we come back, we'll look at the competition that Houston faces for every single container slipping through the canal and into the Atlantic. The Panama Canal expansion will likely change the way the world ships its goods. The existing canal locks are 110 feet wide, 1,000 feet long, and 42 feet deep. The new locks for the larger vessels will be 180 feet wide, 1,400 feet long, and 60 feet deep, meaning ships 3 times as large will be able to sail through the canal and straight into the Atlantic and toward the Gulf of Mexico.
And we know that the Panama Canal is going to forever change the way logistics and distribution come through the Gulf Coast. But there's no doubt about it that as it relates to the Gulf, Houston is absolutely king.
While Houston may be the king of the Gulf here on the East Coast, there's a lot to consider. In Florida, there are 4 ports hoping to benefit from the Panama Canal, not the least of which is the Port of Miami.
Miami is the largest port in Florida, the 11th busiest container port in the U.S. It's already in the midst of spending more than $2 billion preparing for the extra traffic its authority knows the canal expansion will bring.
This would include a $1 billion tunnel currently under construction, scheduled to open in the summer of 2014. Also, a 50-foot dredge by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
That dredging is significant here because it will make Miami's port deeper than the Houston Ship Channel and the Port of Houston. The 4-lane tunnel built 100 feet beneath Biscayne Bay is important because it will also offload traffic on 18-wheelers to head north immediately.
This project connects the Port of Miami directly to the highway system without a single traffic signal. Literally, in a matter of a minute and a half, you can literally leave the Port of Miami and be on the interstate system.
Miami anticipates doubling its container activity by 2020. Like Houston, Miami's port team has also traveled to Panama to enhance its relationship. And like Houston, Miami faces competition from other ports who want in the game. New Orleans, Tampa, Jacksonville, Savannah, Norfolk, and New York, New Jersey all have efforts underway to improve their ability to handle the extra traffic.
It's going to be a dynamic chess game, and I'm not sure I would bet on any single player.
Daniel Crocker is a senior commercial officer with the U.S. Embassy in Panama. His job, in part, is to analyze how U.S. markets benefit from what's happening in Panama.
Houston's fascinating because Houston has a huge potential in terms of its location. It's like the real estate guys tell you, right? It's all location. And if you look at what their competition is right now, it's Port of Long Beach. All this traffic comes into Port of Long Beach and it gets multimodal east of the Rockies to places like Chicago. If Houston has an advantage of an all-water route for some of these bigger boats, where the boats can steam up through the Panama Canal and actually go to the Port of Houston, and then take the train or road routes up to places like Chicago and stop on all the points in between, it represents a tremendous potential.
But Crocker also warns of another competitor in islands such as Barbados or the Bahamas, where those much larger ships could offload in those ports and then send more smaller ships to the U.S. It's called transshipment and means the improvements made to handle those larger ships might not be needed. Still, Houston seems to be especially well situated. At least it is according to the man who runs the canal.
Because Houston has the Gulf, okay? It's one of the main ports in the Gulf area. And it's a gateway to get into all of Texas.
How prepared is Houston?
Well, I think that Houston is been advancing very much. It's expanding its ports, the capability for moving containers.
One advantage Houston has in moving those containers is rail. Railroad infrastructure is difficult to build, but Houston already has a lot of it. And major highways running north, east, and west with no mountains in the way make the ground transit of goods all the easier.
So jobs that are associated with shipping, with distribution, with logistics would naturally find their place in the Houston economy.
But at what cost might that growth come?
Right now, all we're talking about is the good stuff that goods movement brings. We're not really dealing truthfully with the negative implications of goods movement.
When we return, the possible negative implications of the canal expansion and its impact on Southeast Texas. Among the group of local business leaders who recently trekked to the Panama Canal was Missouri City Council member Danny Wynn.
I think this is great. I mean, this is going to be a great opportunity for everybody, for Panama, Houston, and other related cities in America.
He sees the potential economic benefit the canal's $5 billion expansion could have with a new route for Asian cargo.
I could visualize, Tom, all the cargo shipment from Asia, from Vietnam, from Thailand will go through here. And of course, the cargo will bring the related industry and opportunity with it. So I think this is very exciting.
And while most of Houston's business community would agree with Councilmember Wynn, Tony Villarreal might have a different take.
Financially, we're not able to move.
Villarreal and his young family moved into their Bay Colony home just before the Bayport expansion began 8 years ago. Now the massive cranes that load and offload cargo are his neighbors, and they run at all times of the day or night.
as operations increase, so do the noise. The noise is getting loud. You know, you interrupt sleep over a long period of time, that really has a physiological effect on you, which is very negative.
His neighborhood is one of many next door to the Bayport expansion. Countless homes are up for sale, some of them abandoned. And Villarreal sees the Panama Canal as merely expanding the issues facing his community.
I'm excited for Houston, you know, in terms of economic opportunities, in terms of turning Houston around so Houston can remain competitive. But from a personal point of view, I'm not benefiting from their operations.
Villarreal is not the only one concerned.
If we're going to build out this infrastructure that's going to be a core part of our economy for decades to come, let's build it out in a very modern, forward-looking way that minimizes the impact on community.
Matthew Tejada is the executive director of Air Alliance Houston. His concerns are that communities like Tony Villarreal's will disappear with an expanding port. But beyond that, his group worries about the long-term environmental impact that more larger ships, trains, and truckloads of goods will have throughout the region, and how they might add to the existing pollution issues already facing Southeast Texas.
You're adding thousands and thousands and thousands of new sources, and those sources at sometimes are concentrated in one area and can have a huge impact on a neighboring community, but also those sources spread out. They diffuse around entire regions with truck traffic or barge traffic or trains, and that starts to spread pollution in bigger ways in other communities.
That part of the equation is as unknown as just how much traffic the canal expansion will really bring. The more Houston benefits economically from increased traffic and logistics business, the more of an issue that added noise and air pollution becomes. Can Houston's already clogged highways handle even more truck traffic in and out of town? The Port Authority says it is growing and expanding in an environmentally conscious way. The people who live in the shadow of its cranes don't quite buy that. But without question, the canal project that bridges the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans is closer to its completion every day, which means we are closer to finding out just how much of a game changer the expansion of the world's eighth wonder will be for Houston, its port, and its people.